For real, you need to be telling people that they've been duped. Everybody wants to be a victim, am I right? And I mean that in a good way. So I'm jumping into another video here today, and instead of reading my script off of a teleprompter, I'm just putting it right here, and I can read it right off of here, and then we can all see it. So yeah, we all want to be a victim in some capacity or another. Seriously, who wants to just have a problem that's your fault or because you're just, lazy or stupid? So we all want a good reason for things to not be going the way that we want them to. Give your prospects and leads a reason to believe the problem is not their fault. So this is the first video in a 6-part series on my marketing and communication framework that uses cult techniques of persuasion from a real ex-cult member. The old way of talking about your prospective customer's problem, then offering your solution, which is your product or service, is dead. Though, I really shouldn't say dead, but they can smell it coming from a mile away. That's why everyone is saying we're in a trust recession when it, comes to the coaching industry, but I've been seeing the trust recession stuff in a lot of other niches other than just, coaching and consulting. So here's the 6-part framework that you should be using instead. 1, justify their failures. 2, confirm their suspicions. 3, calm their fears. 4, encourage their dreams. 5, contradict their current beliefs. And 6, solidify their logic. And these actually do need to come in this order. So in this video, I will be talking about number 1, justifying their failures. I'm Jason, and I'm an ex-high-ranking cult member that now uses the techniques of manipulation and persuasion I learned on the inside for ethical business marketing and sales. If you want to get deeper in the weeds with me, there's a link to my free group in the description. You know what to do with it. So first, I want to lay a foundation of what is actually happening psychologically with your prospects when you lead with justifying the failure or problem rather than a typical, pain point type presentation. Most online marketing advice tells you to call out problems and pain points, like this. Do you have wrinkles? Buy my magic skin cream. Change this framework to a failure justifying one and it looks like this. Wrinkles are not from age. They are from too much UV light. Here's a link to UV reversal cream. This oversimplified example highlights the problem with traditional marketing. By calling out the problem, you remind your prospects that they have the problem to begin with. This is a negative experience right off the bat. You do not want their first touch point with you to be negative. By justifying the problem, failure or pain point first, you shift to what's called an external locus of control. Talking about the problem itself, do you have wrinkles, doesn't offer any immediate consolation and kind of throws it in their face. They may very well be thinking about their problem, but the last thing they want for you to do is to remind them about it before you've demonstrated any ability to be of any value. So changing to a framework like, the wrinkles are not caused by old age, but by too much UV light does several things at once. It gives the person you're trying to reach a reasonable opportunity to self-identify. They know they have a problem, and if they don't, this framework gives them a chance to recognize it without you having to risk a negative interaction by calling it out. Well, what about the people actively searching for a solution already, which means they're problem aware? But the same framework still stands. In fact, it means they're already problem aware and probably ready for a solution, not wanting to be reminded necessarily that they have the problem. So an exception to this is in a webinar or a sales presentation format. There's a time and a place for hammering the negative feelings and the pain points so that you can, evoke those emotions, so that you can highlight and contrast those against the positive feelings that your solution will create and be able to do that in real time. But yeah, this is getting a little deeper than I generally go here, so some of these tactics are reserved for my group and paid access. There's a link in the description. The format of, wrinkles are not caused by old age, but by too much UV light, using an example, is justifying the failure in the problem, like I said, to an external locus of control. This is also providing immediate value. Because by doing this, you've offered value, right? You've given them a reason that the problem exists, and one that's, not their fault, before you ask for their attention. And this is a massively overlooked phenomena in advertising, particularly. Even a single sentence of what I call a value delivery hook, as opposed to a curiosity hook, for example, before asking for their attention can make or break the success of an ad or a landing page. To be fair, there's plenty of advice out there telling you to add value with your content, but relatively little advice on how to do just that. But it needs to be done very strategically. So a third benefit of justifying the failure before directly calling out a pain point is what I call the concept of sides. Now imagine you have a fence or a divider. You're on one side of the solution. Your prospect is on the other with their problem. Common positioning keeps it this way by effectively saying, hey, if you have wrinkles, look, I'm over here and I can help you with that. My justifying their failure framework allows you to position yourself on the same side as your prospect. It becomes, you're saying this is the reason for, whatever the thing is, and here's the solution that helps with that. And, you're like pointing over the fence towards the solution. So this subconsciously puts you and your prospect as allies on the same side. And you want to subtly be doing them a favor by pointing them in the right direction. This positioning continues to compound on itself with the subtle distinction of doing them a favor by pointing out a solution, right? Rather than just making them an offer to provide a solution, is leading to the psychological tendency of reciprocation. If they subconsciously feel like you have provided information as a favor, most people are more willing to reciprocate a favor, which is in this case hopefully purchasing your product or your service, rather than forcing a value trade decision that calling out to them from the other side of the metaphorical fence does. I hope this makes sense. In another way, if you're metaphorically on different sides of the fence, they have to decide if the proposed value transaction is worth the effort before they climb the fence, knowing full well they won't be able to know if the transaction is truly worth it until they've completed the effort, which is usually paying some money, subconsciously all the while knowing it's a transaction and you will be making a profit from that transaction or you wouldn't be offering it in the first place, right? They know this. So the slight shift in positioning yourself on their side of the fence by justifying the failure or problem to an external locus of control and pointing in the direction of a solution can be far more effective in suppressing the instinct to weigh the reason as to why you're making them an offer. And combining this with the compounding of reciprocity, again, from a favor, if you do a favor for somebody, then they're more likely to do a favor back to you. You get more effective messaging that results in more sales or whatever action it is that you're looking for. Now, to drive this point home, I'll explain it from the cult perspective. A recruiter almost never walks around asking people if they feel lonely and misunderstood. It's personal and obtrusive to ask those kind of questions, which is why I also think, a lot of marketing is not as effective as it could be when you're calling people out and, wow, do you feel fat and ugly? It doesn't make people feel good. Rudeness puts people off. This is why cult recruiters will universally start conversations and tie into things that are relevant, but most importantly, external to their target. Things like politics, religion, and culture. Making carefully engineered statements about things like this that justify their current state will often lead to a reaction from the people most negatively affected by the statement. And this will most likely be those most open to an alternative solution if the solution makes logical and congruent sense. The key is purposefully designing every step of this process. Anyway, if you want to dive deeper, hit the link in the description, jump into my free private group. I get more into the weeds there. And also watch the next video where I talk about the second part of this 6-part framework.